shop during school hours. And then she had to try to sneak back into school before the final bell, and she didn't always succeed. And according to Susan, she was one of those ones that was always in the girls' toilet smoking. There you go. Val refused to learn French and had to go to summer school many times just to atone for her stubbornness. It didn't help her learn more French, but she went to summer school. She was a self-proclaimed disaster in the home economics classroom, sewing up armholes of garments and baking flat cakes. In later years, though, she did some fine knitting and made a mean spaghetti bolognese. I was surprised to learn from Wendy that Val insisted on taking charge of Thanksgiving dinner when she returned to Canada about 5 years ago. That was a real shock. Believe it? Because, you know how she is about dinners here. Yeah. Sit down, drink. So there she was. She was playing the big sister, I think. So, in spite of a bad habit or two, Val was a good athlete from an early age. You know about her swimming, skiing, and ice skating prowess. In the late 50s, the construction of a community center in Bay du Fay meant that there was now a gym, a dance hall, and a swimming pool for the enjoyment of all those people. In about 1959, Val got a job as a lifeguard at that pool, keeping her in pocket money for 2 or 3 summers. And I think it meant that she didn't have to snitch the cigarettes out of Ben's coat. So there you go. But you know, she took up swimming later in Leichhardt for the senior squad. And so she really kept up with all these things for her whole life. Having an August birthday meant that Val was only 16 years old when she finished high school. That was too young to get much of a job in the area.
I'm afraid, yeah.
Sorry.
Always being possessed.
She wasn't interested in going to uni in those days. However, in later years, she did spend a lot of time up at Macquarie Uni pursuing a BA in sociology. So she did go back to McDonald and complete an extra year. Susan told me for sure it wasn't repeating. It was just an extra year to keep her kind of off the streets and out of trouble, I suspect. So anyway, I don't know what she did in the early 60s, but in the late 60s, she started work at Montreal General in the pathology department. Now at that time, gaining employment had less to do with credentials and more to do with a willingness to learn on the job and being on the spot when an opportunity presented itself. Val's friend Brenda was working in the HR department of the hospital. She learned about a job in the lab and went and got it. Val joined the lab about that time and became friends there with Sandy Burke and Joan Trousseau. Val, Brenda, and Joan were great friends at work and beyond. They were a hard-working team in the lab, and Brenda affirms that Val was very good at her job and willing to help anybody at any time. They had fun too, of course, with hijinks and all the usual stuff. There was a circle of black cardboard that was labeled the black spot of death, and that traveled mysteriously from workstation to workstation. And, they were just putting it near, if anybody was maybe smoking a cigarette while they were looking at a microscope, which Val was known to do, and so the black spot of death would appear. Anyhow, they all had fun outside of work too. Apparently Val had a lot of parties at her place, where Sandy and Brenda met Val's friend Robin, and a few other people from the travel industry. Some of us here knew Robin a little bit, and we knew that Val was planning to move up to the Blue Mountains with her before circumstances changed, and then she went off to Benora Point. In Montreal, Val and her friends met regularly around the bridge table, sharing a bottle of sherry, and talked to their boss, who was not particularly popular. They went to Quebec City during the Festival Bonhomme, or the Winter Festival, staying at the Chateau Frontenac, which these days costs about $675 a night. I don't know what it cost in those days. I don't think it was that expensive. No doubt they made a valiant contribution to the festive atmosphere. Now that was a pun, John. Did you catch it? Okay. Val arrived in Australia in 1972. Sandy Burke was meant to come with her, but she decided to stay in Canada and get married instead. So what happened was that Val and Sandy's husband to be, did a road trip across Canada to get to the West Coast. They put her in a boat and she came on to Sydney. And on that same boat was probably Robin and also Sue Bingham, Derek, her husband, and Liz. And they were lifelong friends of Val. So they were on the boat all the way here. So leaving Canada did not mean that Val left her friendships behind. Val, Sandy, Brenda, and Joan met in Hawaii for a golfing holiday 25 years later and had, by all reports, a wonderful time. Sandy told me that the people in the neighboring condo complained about the noise coming from next door, and that was only on day one of their holiday. So I guess that means it takes absolutely no time at all for old friends to pick up where they left off 25 years previously, and once the art of partying is mastered, it stays with you forever. So we have a little picture of the friend that I was about to meet. Lots of adjectives work with describing Val. She was adventurous, fun-loving, rebellious, stubborn, a little bit bossy, a little bit naughty, athletic, smart, loyal, helpful, mischievous, and a good friend, and certainly unique. And now to the meeting that changed my life. These days when I travel on my own, which is reasonably often, I very rarely speak to anybody on either side of me. I just don't. You know, I mean, after all, you're in a tin can up in the air and you're going to sit there for 15 hours. You're going to get off. You're going to go your separate ways and not look back. Why would you talk to them? You know? So, anyhow, but then, back in 1975, I was relatively new to Australia, and I was moving from Sydney, from the country, so it was kind of to my advantage to be a little bit friendly, and therefore, more open to meeting new people. I boarded the flight, Pan Am, 3:30, heading to Vancouver, and Val was sitting right next to me.
What was the flight number?
She was a little bit cool, not chatty at all. I noticed straight away that she had a copy of War and Peace, and she was holding up, like armor. And but throughout the flight and the very long transit stop in Honolulu, she put up with me and even answered most of my questions. I discovered that Val was a person who hated flying. She was connecting to Montreal. We were landing in Vancouver at midnight. She was going to be waiting in the airport for about 7 hours and catching a flight the next morning to go to Montreal. After 6 weeks, we also discovered that we were going to be on the same flight coming back to Sydney. What a happy coincidence. We planned to meet again in January at Vancouver Airport and to sit together on the return flight. We did exactly that, and the rest is history. I'm very grateful to Val for more than 40 years of friendship and shared experiences. Meeting Val on that Pan Am flight on the 12th of December 1975 changed and shaped my life. If not for Val, I would not know a single person in this room. And if not for Val, there are 2 people in this room who would not be here today. Thank you, Val.
What's that noise?
Just crying.
What's that noise?
That's it.
I think one thing has to be said here. We can all cry because I've already started. Okay, that was lovely though, because lots of us don't know who Val previously, and it was because Mary came to live in Lennox Street that we got to know both of them really. So, look, I'm going to finish up the proceedings with a poem because she should have a last poem. But you will notice that some of the things that Mary said and some of the things in my poem are not quite correct. Her version is right. I just have to write.
You have creative license.
Yeah, creative license. Absolutely. But look, I'm now going to hand on. Would anybody else like to say anything?
Yeah, I'll say something. And in fact, before I do, my earliest memories of Bellevue Hill, where everyone used to live, was Anne sitting in the middle of the room holding court.
Something's going to change.
There was a chair in the middle of the room, I swear. And you sat there. This is before you went to England. So really to pick up on Mary's theme about how improbable things are. If a crazy Englishman didn't decide to go to Australia and work for Cotties and make friends with a crazy Italian who worked at Cotties, and meanwhile a crazy American happened to be sitting next to
Crazy Canadian.
Canadian on a plane, and then it all came together. It's like you. I mean, if you did that in a movie, people would.
And if I hadn't have called John a pig.